Hello and welcome to TRT World Forum 2020's Reflections session on the future of film industry in a post-pandemic world. Today, I will host distinguished guests to discuss the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the global film industry. To talk us through the future of big-budget films, Ali Arikan is here with us. He's an Istanbul-based film critic. Hi, thanks a lot for joining us on TRT World Forum today. So, I would like you to take us through the pre-pandemic times. I mean, what were we waiting for in terms of big-budget movies? Take us back to this time last year, for example.
Well, this time last year, it had only just started in China, and we weren't really sure where the whole thing, or how the whole thing was going to develop. And we definitely didn't even realize that it would affect cinemas or film or entertainment, or just, have this overreaching effect on life itself. Looking at 2020, basically the films that people were most looking forward to are obviously the Christopher Nolan film Tenet, and then you had Black Widow, the Marvel film, Wonder Woman 1984, the Wonder Woman sequel, James Bond, the new Bond film, the new A Quiet Place, and Mulan. So these were films that people were looking forward to. Now, I mentioned them, of course, because they've all been delayed now, except for Wonder Woman, which is coming out in a different sort of way this year. So for all intents and purposes, all these films have been delayed till next year.
Okay, look at what happened to Mulan and Tenet, for example. They are cited as box office failures. Do you think it was a wise move to release them?
Well, when it comes to Tenet, I think it was the sort of directorial and studio capriciousness that led to that sort of release when you knew for a fact that it was not going to play in New York and LA and certain other parts of the country in the United States. Basically, what happened is it was never going to be the cultural conversation point, the talking point that the Christopher Nolan film otherwise would have. Similarly, even though it did open in certain places in Europe and obviously China, the rest of the world, unless the film really opens in the United States, it cannot dominate the cultural conversation. It just possibly going forward in the next few years, obviously this might change, but that's just a simple fact of the matter right now. Was it wise? I think they could have waited, but at the tail end of August, it kind of looked like this whole thing was dying down and people were a bit more confident about it. Of course, now we're everywhere in the world, we're experiencing a second wave or a third wave, or basically like a tsunami that never really ended. So they had to do that. With Mulan, I think Disney basically took a chance. What Disney did was offer Mulan as a video on demand on its platform, on its fairly new platform, Disney Plus, for $30. And from what we can see is not a lot of people actually paid for that. So they're both, to a certain extent, I think they're both failures, definitely. But I don't think they are really representative of how studios are going to tackle this problem in the very initial months ahead of 2021.
How should they tackle this problem?
Well, I'm not a studio accountant, and as everyone knows, Hollywood accounting is rather creative. So you never quite know how much a film is made or whether it's a box office failure or not. I think the only thing to do right now is to wait. For the vaccine or wait for some sort of confidence to come back into the market. And the way you look at it, I think not until April any really big film is coming out. If you look at China, where things seem to have got back to a semblance of normality, Chinese box office has gone back to pre-COVID days. So when it comes to blockbuster films, I think in perhaps not the immediate future, but in the medium term, we will be going back to, with regard to blockbuster films, this is, wide-scale filmmaking, we'll be going back to pre-COVID days. But what will happen is, I think there's going to be a monumental change in distribution when it comes to smaller films and medium-sized films.
Okay, I want to break it down. You said that the production studios should wait. This is the wisest thing to do at the moment. How much of a financial risk do you think is it to hold off a release date for production of a huge scale?
Well, it must be massive. I mean, really, in 2020, none of these companies released any films, and you're going to have this huge backlog in 2021 where films that were actually scheduled for 2021 will open. Some of them, like 60% of them, have been delayed as well because of COVID, because they were supposed to be shooting this year. But you're going to have this huge backlog, and I think even if they do release it, they're not really going to have the sort of, box office receipts that they would have received in 2020 had everything been okay. So I think they're going to suffer from a major risk anyway. They're not going to be making as much money as they were planning to. But I'm sure they have contingency plans for this as well. I think what is going to happen, I mean, this is something that I should mention really, is what is going to happen with medium-sized and smaller films is there's going to be a day and date release, which means you're going to have these films opening in cinemas, but at the same time offered on video on demand. So basically, you can watch them at home as well. So I think this is going to be the major monumental change from COVID. Not necessarily blockbuster filmmaking. I think people will still be going to the cinemas to see the largest, to see the biggest films. I don't think anyone is going to be waiting at home to watch Avatar 2. And the whole thing is being presented as this new experience, new cinematic experience by James Cameron. But smaller films, I think people's habits have changed, people want content right there and then, from the confines of their homes, and people will be staying at home for smaller films.
All right, Ali Arikan, it was lovely talking to you. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Scott Roxborough is the European news editor at The Hollywood Reporter. Hi, Scott. It's lovely to have you on TRT World Forum today. So, in order to understand what COVID-19 did to the world of cinema, let's start with this big question here. We've seen many pandemics. The humanity has seen world wars, many disastrous events. Do you think this is the strongest blow cinema has taken?
In terms of the damage and the long-lasting damage that COVID-19 is going to have on the cinema industry, I'd say yes. I mean, even in the Second World War, where you had bombing across Europe, cinemas stayed open. During the Blitz in London, during the bombing of Berlin, the cinemas were still open. People were still going to the cinemas. COVID-19 has stopped that. Not everywhere in the world, but in large areas of the world, the theaters are closed, and that's never happened before to this extent. And while maybe there's optimism now that we'll be coming out of this pandemic fairly soon, I think the damage that it's done to the cinema industry might be permanent, and will definitely have a huge impact on the shape of the film industry in the coming years.
Okay, it really is a bold statement saying that it is the strongest blow cinema has taken. Do we have any figures? Do we know how much money is lost?
This is an incredibly difficult thing to put an actual number on the damage. It is going to be in the billions. That's, I think, very, very clear. Now, it'll be a complicated mathematics that goes on after this pandemic is over to look at box office loss against gains made through a streaming revenue and so forth. But I think it's quite clear that we're talking about a loss of billions of dollars of box office revenue, plus the additional costs to productions that have been stopped because of this pandemic, the ones that have been delayed, the ones that have gone forward but have cost a lot more because of new safety measures that have to be put in place and so forth. So I definitely think, though it would be difficult to put an exact figure on it at the moment, we're talking about billions of dollars and a level of, say, damage to the film industry that we've never seen before.
Okay, we're saying this in terms of the business perspective, of course, because for the audience, for the spectator, of course, some things have changed, some productions have been delayed and postponed and cancelled, but not that much has changed, right? Because we do have the video-on-demand services now.
Well, I mean, there's something changed if people actually like to see films in theaters, which I do, and I think a lot of people do. That has changed for a lot of people in the world because they're unable to, because cinemas are shut. But of course, I take your point. There are a lot of movies available online, and for people who prefer to just watch from home, not a lot has changed. Most of the films that were finished, that were not able to come into theaters, have been put out online. And for a lot of people, it's been an incredible time because maybe they've been stuck at home and they've been able to watch a plethora of incredible films on streaming platforms. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing at all. I think it's incredible that we have so much access to so many movies now online at our fingertips. But it does mean a major shift for the film industry as a whole, and that is going to have an impact also for viewers in a few months' time, in a couple of years' time, as maybe a lot of movies won't be able to be made in the same way because there won't be the sort of financial models behind them in order to finance them. But that's something that's going to be that normal fans will only see in about a year or 2 years' time.
Are you expecting a lot of movie theaters to shut down when the pandemic is over, if the pandemic is over?
Yes, I mean that's the major issue really right now. That's the sort of the bottleneck of the industry, or the cinemas themselves. They're shut right now. They have no revenue. These businesses are in real danger of collapsing. Some of the bigger chains might be able to finance themselves by taking on enough debt to get through this period. We just saw Cineworld, which is the second largest cinema chain worldwide, take on a bunch of new debt just today. That might get them over the hump, so they'll be able to survive. But I think especially a lot of smaller theaters and independent theaters could shut down, could go bankrupt during this period. And it might take a much longer time for them to recover. And we might see a lot of them never come back. And that, I think, will be a huge loss, not just for film fans, but also just for these whole neighborhoods where you've seen these theaters that have been in family businesses passed down from generation to generation really cease to exist.
Okay, well, this would mean, I guess, that we would be left with a lot of chains, but not really independent movie theaters. And what do you think, what kind of an impact do you think this will leave on the creators, I mean, the world of cinema, let's say art house cinema?
Yeah, art house cinema is really the biggest, the area of the film world that's in the biggest danger right now, because they are much more reliant on the theaters to show their films. They're much more reliant on these smaller independent chains to carry their movies. And what I see happening, the larger impact of COVID-19 going forward, I think will be, you'll see much more consolidation. So the bigger theater chains that are able to take on debt and finance themselves through this crisis, they'll get bigger. The production companies will probably get bigger. The film studios will probably get stronger out of this, and the independents will be harder hit. And the art house cinemas in particular will be harder hit, and art house producers will be hard hit. I think in certain areas where you have, like here in Europe, where you have a lot of public financing of the cinema business, they could survive because the governments will just step in and finance them, essentially. But I think in a lot of areas of the world where you don't have that type of support, you'll see these art house cinemas, these art house producers really go under. And I think it could be a long time before they're able to bounce back.
Okay, Scott. Please enlighten us about this, because I'm not even sure about how many movies are in production at the moment. It is way less than before, right?
Yeah, it's substantially dropped off. I mean, there's a lot of different issues around this, but safety is one of the big ones because of the COVID-19 regulations that have been put in place in a lot of countries. It's very, very difficult to produce a movie in the same way. So instead of the hundreds of productions that you'd usually have happening at this time of year, we're down to dozens, really. A lot of productions are going forward. Some of the bigger ones are going forward. But they're doing so in a completely different way. Productions are now in this sort of bubble situation where they take everyone involved in a production, put them in one space essentially, and then isolate them from the rest of the world for the duration of the production. This is a lot more expensive to make films this way. Some producers tell me up to 10% is added to on top to a budget just for COVID safety regulations, and it means that a lot of productions just can't be made, especially films that require large crowd scenes, for example. That's almost impossible to do right now. So they either have to find new technical solutions or just not make those movies until we have a vaccine, until it's safer, and until we can go back to making movies in the way that we used to.
Well, okay, that would be a huge change for sure. Scott, do you think overall, that these changing habits and these changing dynamics in the industry will leave a negative impact on the world of cinema, or do you think that it will just give the industry more flexibility?
I think in the short term, there will be a very negative impact just because a lot of the smaller production companies, the smaller cinemas, sort of the independent world in general in cinema will be very hard hit, and it will take a time to recover. Over the long term, I'm not so pessimistic. I think what we're going to see is a strengthening of trends that we've already had in the industry for the last couple of years, where we're going to see fewer films come into cinemas and maybe stay longer, maybe a return to the old model of theater releasing, where we didn't have as many films coming out every weekend in the theaters. You're going to see a lot more films going straight to streaming or only being in theaters a very short time, or going out simultaneously on online platforms and in theaters. These sort of mixed models, which are becoming much more popular now under COVID. I think you're going to see a lot more of that. That's not necessarily a negative thing. I think it's going to mean a lot more options for film fans. And I think these trends of growth in streaming, which gives us access to a lot more movies from around the world, that's not going to stop, and it's probably going to strengthen through this. And so that could be a good thing for film fans. But in the short term, particularly for smaller and independent filmmakers, it's going to be a rough ride.
All right, Scott Roxborough, thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts with us on TRT World Forum today. Filmmaker Gurinder Chadha joins me now. Hi, thanks a lot for joining us today. So you did something very unique during the pandemic, during the quarantine. You turned your lockdown experience into a movie for Netflix. Why don't we start with that? Tell me how it came into being.
Well, I got approached by the Italian producers who said that they had been commissioned by Netflix to get 18 directors from around the world to make a lockdown short. So anything they wanted to make, they could make, but they had to make it with their own camera or their own phone within their own environment during lockdown, with no crew, nothing. And initially, I didn't really care for the idea because I thought it was too indulgent. I thought, who wants to see me in lockdown? Everyone's going through their own stuff. What do I want to contribute to that? And then my husband, in fact, he was looking at the computer and, like a lot of parents, I'm always recording everything about my children on the phone, or little videos, little funny things. And so we actually had a lot of footage. And then the idea came to me, why don't we make a film from the children's perspective of lockdown? So that's what we ended up making. So my children actually did the voiceover, and my children sort of controlled the film, and that became our lockdown film.
And turns out a lot of people are interested in seeing your lockdown experience. You know, Gurinder, one thing that is interesting for me is that you sort of have to an extent, divorce the fact that these are your children. I mean, they are your actors in a way, but then you are the mother as well. So how did you sort of deal with this duality?
Well, the thing is, I tried to be as truthful as possible. And, you know, they don't like to be filmed all the time. And so I put that in. You know, my son's complaining, says, why do you always film me? Stop filming me. And takes my camera and throws it. So I put that in. I put in the fact that they were nervous about me being overweight, you know, and health. And so from that day, actually, after that film, I started on a big health drive, you know. So I just made it as truthful as possible. But what was interesting is this is a very unusual time. You know, COVID, lockdown is a very unusual time. And in many ways, it's the great equalizer in that it's brought a lot of us together in the world, you know, because we're all going through the same thing. And I think what the film ended up doing was, you know, my experience with my children and my family was really representative of people all over the world. And I think by focusing on my children, it made it even more universal. And so they are my children in the film, but I think they could be anybody's children. That's kind of what the experience became, and that's how I think it was received around the world.
I wonder what your children thought about the end product. I mean, what was their reaction when they saw the movie?
Well, my daughter absolutely loved it and kept telling everybody about it. And my son was embarrassed about the scenes with me dancing and all the funny scenes with his parents. Like all kids, you know, he was embarrassed about his parents. So he didn't really talk about it very much, but my daughter absolutely loved it.
And I wonder what kind of sacrifices, I mean, I'm sure you had to sacrifice some things for filming this. I wonder what difficulties you dealt with during the process.
Well, I think the hardest thing was getting the kids to focus on doing a voiceover, you know, because as a director, I know how to direct actors, you know, to get a performance, but directing your children is tough. And we had to do the voiceovers quite a few times. And I kept trying to tell them, don't read it, just be natural. And they were getting very, very cross with me. And so I've got a lot of takes of those voiceovers where they're just very cross and don't want to do it and throwing wobblies and there's tears and all the rest of it. So, you know, doing all the natural things were fine, you know, where I normally video them. But doing filmic things like voiceover, that was tough. But in the end, though, you know, that we made that film in April, May. And now, October, November, they've already grown. They're already different. They've changed. I mean, children grow so fast. So in some ways, when I made that film, they were children. And now, in June, it was their birthday. They turned 13, my twins. So now they're teenagers. So looking back, I think it's a wonderful capsule of time for them. And now I think they appreciate that because obviously they know their mother is a film director and they know, you know, that life, you know, they've been on set with me since they were 3 months old, you know, wherever I'm filming, I always take them with me. So they're very used to, you know, the world around film. But I think they understand and appreciate the bigger story here, the story of how we're all in this together.
Amazing. Okay, Gurinder, I wonder how COVID-19 impacted you as a filmmaker, apart from this project. Do you think it has been transformative for you?
Well, I think for me, I was very grateful that I had some time to just stop, you know, just get off the production, you know, directing hamster wheel, as I say. And so it gave me time to just sort of stop and say, okay, what do I want to do? What would I really like to do right now? So I've spent the last 6, 7 months just writing scripts, planning films that I would like to make when things go back to normal. But I'm not in any rush to go out and go into production during COVID. And I do believe it will be in control next year, and we'll be back, to our industry will be back to how it, was. Although we'll all be a lot more health-wise, I think, conscious. But I have valued the time to sit and write. So I've been working on several different scripts, and that has been a fantastic, rewarding experience for me.
So you're hopeful about the future?
Very hopeful, yes.
Okay, Gurinder, Chadha, it was lovely talking to you. I'm glad to host you on TRT World Forum today. That's it from me for now on TRT World Forum. I'm Elif Bereketli. I would like to thank our guests for joining us and sharing their thoughts with us on the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the global cinema industry, the future of big budget movies, the dire situation movie theaters are in, and online distribution and video on demand services. TRT World Forum 2020 will continue to discuss shifting dynamics, the international order in a post-pandemic world. Do stay with us.